Please welcome Annie Colbert, Mashable Executive Editor, in conversation with Nicole CUSHMAN, Executive Director of Answer, RIYADH KHALAF, YouTube Creators for Change Global Ambassador, and Nick KROLL, actor, comedian, writer, and producer.
How are we doing? Good. Excellent. So we're here to have a conversation about sex and sex ed. And I know some of you right now probably just had a flashback to all of your memories of puberty and awkward conversations that you may have had with your educators or your parents. But we're lucky enough today to have 3 people here who are pushing the conversation about sex forward and pushing the awkwardness aside a little bit, or maybe pulling it right to the center and making it a little bit less awkward. So we get on the same page here. I'm going to ask everyone to introduce themselves and share a memory that you have about learning about sex. And I can start so that we relieve some of that awkwardness. So I'm Annie. My very Midwestern parents never said a word about sex to me at all, but we did have a set of encyclopedias that were printed in the mid-70s, and I would sneak down to the basement and look up words like intercourse or penis, and that was my sex education, and that was kind of it. Okay.
Hi everyone, my name is Nicole CUSHMAN, and I had a pretty opposite experience. My very progressive hippie parents talked to me a little too much about sex. It was kind of a constant theme, and then I became a sex educator. So here you are.
Before I talk about mine, I just want to apologize for this brown shoe. I stepped into one of your glorious New York puddles on the way here, so I've been blessed by your city, and I can feel the flesh-eating bacteria eating away my foot as we speak. So can we say dirty words?
Yes.
Is that all right? They'll probably sound dirtier with my accent. So I had a friend called Darren who pulled me aside, and he said, you know, when you touch your penis a lot, this stuff comes out of it. It's called jip, and it's green, and it stinks, and it's really, really gonna hurt you. So try not to touch yourself. I believed that for 2 years. I did touch myself. It wasn't green, and I was a very happy boy.
Yeah. My name is Darren. No. My name is Nick KROLL, and I make a show about puberty, specifically about this time, an animated show called Big Mouth. And so I've spent the last, thank you, a number of years thinking and talking specifically about these memories. But I remember I think the first sex ed video we watched was a weird video of these 2 kids and the janitor at their school pulling them aside and showing them 2 animals having sex. I think it was called Am I Normal? Which now seems on so many levels wrong and not appropriate sex education. So I think my friend Andrew Goldberg and I, who created the show together, have been working to improve what kids are watching to understand what's happening to their bodies.
For sure. So less than 40% of US high schools and 14% of middle schools offer comprehensive sex ed. And all of you are using platforms like YouTube or Netflix or just the internet in general to talk about sex and push this message out there. So why is it important, especially in this moment, as we all know what's happening in the world, to use these platforms specifically to talk about sex?
Well, I mean, I think anyone in this room who has spent any amount of time around a young person, a teenager, preteen, in the last decade knows that they're pretty much attached permanently to their phones. And this is, frankly, this is where young people are, and we need to meet them where they are. And one of the key places is on YouTube. It is really the leading search engine for adolescents in the US, at least. They're even bypassing Google in many cases and going straight to YouTube to get answers to their questions. And they have a lot of questions that are perfectly normal. And so it's incumbent on us as caring, supportive adults to meet them there with accurate, reliable, non-judgmental answers to their questions.
For me, growing up in school, the sex ed I got was all penis and vagina sex ed. And as a young gay boy, that wasn't really any use for me. So I remember looking at these teachers awkwardly try and skip through the class as quickly as they could with no passion, interest, humor, or explanation that actually sex isn't always as you see it in the movies. By not having the availability of gay sex ed specifically, I then began to feel this weird dysphoria with my identity. Am I right? Am I wrong? Am I sick? Should I try and change? And I then went into this weird sort of cycle of trying to trick myself into being straight by, it's very sad, at night time lying in bed thinking of tits. And nothing would happen, nothing. And it was just, you know, if I had one teacher who said, you know, a guy can get with a guy, and that's fine, and that's great. Not only would that have been very useful for me with the whole shame thing that I felt for over a decade and trying to find myself later in life, but also for the straight pupils in the school with me. Wouldn't it have been great if these heterosexual boy bullies that would chase after me and my friends were desensitized to other kinds of sex? They don't necessarily have to know it because they're going to do that kind of sex, but just knowing that it exists and it's actually okay would have been enough to start that conversation.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think the goal with our show is, in the case of our show, is first and foremost to be funny, to be entertaining, but we're incredibly aware of the messages that we are putting out into the world. And normalizing different versions of what sex is and what puberty and human sexuality in general. And I think one of the things that we've tried to do is give a platform and vocabulary to certain things in more colloquial terms or personifications that could help kids have conversations with each other or with their parents. And really, for us, the biggest thrust of what we try to do, and I think what's so tricky about puberty, is the feeling of being alone, that you are the only one going through this, that other people don't know what's happening to you or can't relate to it. And to just be able to show some of this stuff, I think can make kids feel less alone like you might have felt at that age. Whatever your sexual orientation, gender, or anything is, that everybody is going through it, everybody is dealing with these issues, and then stuff like shame becomes a less potent force.
Mm-hmm. And you both touched on this a little bit, but the way that you're all talking about sex is different than what a lot of us experienced of like the very sterile and robotic and one-size-fits-all sex ed that we got. So why is it important to use humor to get these messages out there?
Okay, I'll go. So I have a podcast on the BBC called Unexpected Fluids, and it's a safe space. We've all had them, folks. It's a safe space where you can go and almost donate a story to kind of take away the fear and worry that, oh, last night I, by accident, pooped on my partner's whatever. It's like, how do you say it in a situation like that? And what I found is the messages that we're getting in from both that podcast and all of the stuff that my friends and I have done on YouTube is that, you know, you're speaking in my language. It's not, you know, we might be saying words that I can't say here today, but it's the words that the young people today naturally use. We're speaking their language, so they don't feel afraid. They don't feel silly because they're looking at it. They can go and talk to their friends about it in school after. And it's just more accessible. Any type of information that you can get across to somebody, sexual or otherwise, is going to be so much more received and remembered when it's mixed in with humor and comedy. That's just naturally how the human brain works. This is why shows like The Daily Show or Nick's show work so well. It's because you're learning, but you're almost being tricked into it. You don't know you're meant to learn, but it just sort of sticks.
And I would say for us, we produce a video series called Amaze that are animated videos for 10 to 14-year-olds. And we use humor because that's what young people told us directly that they wanted. And I think that, you know, if there's any message I can get across, it's to listen to young people, and they will guide you. And we did focus groups with young people across the United States before we developed Amaze. And they said, you know, we don't want it to feel like school, and, you know, it needs to be something entertaining enough that we'll actually want to watch. So that was, you know, one of our guiding principles from the outset.
Yeah, I think to add on to both of what they were saying, I think there's something sometimes about humor which also boils things down to a simpler version of things. So, like I was watching one of your videos about different, how people identify sexually, you know, heterosexual, pansexual, demisexual, all those things that we were writing something this year, and seeing content like yours really, that there is humor to it, it just helps distill things to a more palatable and understandable form. And I think it's true. Kids will tell you, if you listen to kids, they will tell you what they want and need. And then, you know, as a crass commercial entity, they will purchase your item, and that will be the best, because I just want to take money from children.
You also are all going beyond the basic mechanics of sex. So why is it important and essential when we're having these conversations to go beyond the like, what is what and what goes where?
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think Riyadh started this conversation so eloquently by talking about identity and, you know, what are some of the really salient issues that are on young people's minds. If you listen to young people's questions about sex and sexuality, they do want to understand how their bodies work, but they're not really preoccupied with the biology. In my experience, what they're really preoccupied with are relationships. This is fundamentally about human connection. And how do we connect to each other, whether that's in a romantic or sexual context, or in our friendships, or in our families. And we need to be able to contextualize the important, you know, biological information that we want to deliver in a way that really resonates with young people and helps them develop the skills, the tools that they need to establish and maintain healthy and fulfilling relationships.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it comes down to the fact that the kids that I meet anyway, when they come to YouTube meet and greets, or where I panel them in the comment section, I'm like, what did you like about this content? What did you not like? And how can we make it better for you? And they're very, very woke. And if you don't know what woke means, it means that they're plugged in and they know what's going on, because I just learned that, 27. And, you know, I had a young person come up to me recently, and they had a bisexual flag around their shoulders, and they said, oh, I'm a feminist, and I'm also non-binary, and all of these identities that in some spheres in society are shut down or laughed at. And they go to other platforms, digital platforms, and they go, ah, I exist. Because at the end of it, when you boil it down, that's all that they want to feel. I exist, you see me, and I am validated in your eyes. So I think the internet is really leading that, where schools might not be quite there yet.
Mm-hmm.
They covered it.
That's fine, something here. So we're talking a lot about what it means to not have sex ed when you're a teen or a preteen, but what are the broader implications if kids aren't getting this comprehensive sex education?
You know, I think I would say first and foremost that, at least in the United States, the quality of sex ed is really variable around the country, and there are many schools and communities doing a great job and really pushing this agenda forward, but they don't have the resources. And in many cases, there are teachers who are really well-intentioned. They don't receive the training that they need to implement quality sex education. And so a lot of what we're providing can help fill in the gaps. And answer the questions that educators might not be equipped to in the classroom, or that parents might not feel equipped to, you know, lead those discussions. We can provide a sort of conversation starter for them and a tool to sort of round out the conversation. But in terms of, you know, what's at stake here, I think it's really huge. I think, you know, obviously we're concerned with things like unintended pregnancy and STDs, but when we also look at the conversations that are happening around the world around sexual assault and consent right now, we have an opportunity when we provide truly comprehensive quality sex education to help young people examine things like gender roles, build a vocabulary to navigate boundaries and consent, and turn the tide on this epidemic of sexual assault. So, you know, the potential impact if we really reach scale is tremendous.
Mm-hmm.
can you remind me what the question was again?
Yes, of
what happens if we don't?
Yes, what are the broader implications?
Okay, so I saw a really real tangible example of this only a couple of months ago as part of the YouTube Creators for Change program. I went to Swaziland, which is a tiny country in southern Africa, to film a documentary about what it's like to be a queer person there. A lot of talk about sexuality and identity, and we were approached on the street by a group of teenage boys, homophobic teenage boys. They must have been no older than about 16 or 17. And as we started to talk about this historic first ever Pride March that their country was about to have, the language that they were saying shocked me because, you know, living in my London bubble where I live, I'm not exposed to that type of misinformation and miseducation. So by not being given the proper type of sex education, the stuff that they were saying to us was, well, if I come across a gay person, they're going to want to rape me. And we're like, okay, how do you start? Okay, you know. And then the other one was, oh, but if I meet a gay person and you know, I get too close to them, well, then I'm going to become gay. I'm going to catch it from them. And that was just the tip of the iceberg. And then I thought, whoa, okay, here's a living, breathing example of a young person who has by the other stuff we were talking about, I could tell they're very clever young people. And over 10 minutes of having a conversation with these boys, they went from being fearful that I was going to rape them because I was gay or make them gay because I was gay, to shaking my hand and thanking me for the information and saying that they were going to teach their friends how to accept gay people in the future. 10 minutes. Now, that's nothing to do with me. That's anyone's voice can do that. It's just by being exposed and desensitized.
Yeah, I think, I mean, right now, in the last year and change in our country, there's been incredible increase in the dialogue about what's going on, specifically around sexual assault and consent and all of the black and white, but really all the gray area that lives in between. And right now, as we watch the Kavanaugh confirmation hearings, it's everywhere. It's really palpable. And I think these conversations are hard to have, and a lot of what happens with sexual assault and issues of consent are pretty systematic and built at a very young age about what's acceptable and what's not in the country. And so we have to figure out ways to talk about these things that aren't clinical or don't feel otherworldly, that have to feel like tangible and on the ground and real. And I think, so whatever it is that we're doing and whatever you guys are doing out there, it's conversations on a macro level, on a big cultural level, and then individually, and talking to your kids about it and talking to your friends about it, and having the dialogue that it is, because if people don't feel heard on either side, then they shut down. And the more that we can have more honest conversations about it, all sides of it, then I think we have the potential of changing what is, you know, incredibly complicated issues that we're all dealing with.
That's a good place to sort of start wrapping up about, as we all kind of leave here today, how should we start thinking about how we communicate about sex around other people?
I mean, there's no denying that this is a taboo subject, not just here in the US, but across the world. And so I think that these kinds of dialogues are just a great starting point to kind of break through those taboos and get comfortable talking, but more so listening. And in particular, I just want to reiterate listening to young people, to, you know, whether it's your own kids or students or nieces and nephews, listen to the young people in their lives and validate their experiences as normal, as healthy, and true.
That.
Amazing.
Yeah, because we have no time.
Seems like the perfect place to end it. So thank you all so much for talking about sex and having this honest conversation. Hope all of you can do the same.
Thank you.